Welcome to the episode where I go over absolutely everything new in Kubernetes 1.19. And by everything, I mean just the highlights, because everything is a lot. And there'll be links below for the entire changelog if you'd like to give that a read over. And I suggest that you at least give a look over the highlights that listed there.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The No Channel.
All right, so a quick preface. When I'm going through these and doing these high-level things, there's a few things that I tend to ignore and don't mention. Some of them, especially, is when something graduates from beta to GA or to stable. In the Kubernetes world, when something is beta, it's activated by default and mostly used. So something like ingress has been enabled by default for a really long time, and most people use and depend on it in production, even though it was a beta feature until 1.19. So most of the time, I'm going to not bring those up unless if I think that it's just good to bring it up so that you guys are aware of it, because some of those smaller features, unlike ingress, don't get as much screen time as some of the other ones. So for the most part, something going from beta to GA or stable isn't going to hit my top news line. That doesn't mean it's not going to, but a lot of times it's not going to, just because it really doesn't mean a whole lot to you guys. All right. First off, the next release is going to be somewhere in the middle of December. I think I heard December 17th. But it's going to be around the middle of December. So if you're wondering when the next release will, this release was a 5-month release. And really cool thing, they codenamed it the Pawsitive release and made this really cute little graphic to go along with it to just encourage the community as everybody was going through the thing. So that was really cool. And kudos to them. It was a 5-month release cycle. So it's been 5 months since 1.18. So, and before we get going, I just wanted to give you a few options you can use to go ahead and get playing with Kubernetes 1.19. So if there's something that you'd like to get playing with and get interested in and want to test out, you can. There are already kind images. So if you are familiar with kind, you can go ahead and use kind. Here's the command you can use. And this will stand up a kind cluster with 1.19. If you would prefer to stand up your home cluster and you're looking for a distribution, the Cubic project already has 1.19 images out. And that is on a really cool immutable infrastructure OS, kind of like Core OS before Red Hat bought it. So if you want to check that out, that is also the Cubic project also has Kubernetes 1.19. All right. So those are 2 options for you if you want to go ahead and get started. I believe Ubuntu also has theirs. I didn't check, but I'm pretty sure that they probably already have the 1.19 binaries packaged if you want to use something like kubeadm. All right. So the big news, they extended support from 9 months to 12 months. So now each release is going to be supported for 12 months. So 1.19 will be supported for 12 months from its release with backports to security fixes and patches and whatnot. So that's kind of one of the big managerial ones. It is not 4 cycles. So if they go to 5-month cycles, release cycles, this actually won't change how long one version is supported. It's supported for 1 year, not 4 cycles. So if we go to 6-month cycles, it's still only supported for 1 year, not 2 years. I actually think that we should go to 4-month cycles and slow it down a little. There's a lot of work for releasing and stuff like that. And I think a little bit longer would be better, but I'm not a part of that committee. So that probably won't happen. But I do think that that would be really good for the community as a whole to go to 3 times a year. All right. Now, another thing along those lines is when something goes from alpha to beta, it gets enabled by default, which I think is actually the true mistake. I don't think beta features should be enabled by default, but that's just me. They get enabled by default, and things like ingress stayed in beta for years, literally years. And so to prevent this, when something goes into beta, they have 3 cycles, not 9 months, but 3 cycles. So if it's a 6-month cycle, that would mean a year and a half. Now, I think that they're still trying for their 3-month cycle. So that means 3 cycles would be about 9 months on average. But you have 3 cycles to get it into GA. And if you don't get it into GA, it will automatically be deprecated and automatically removed in another 3 cycles, not 3 months, or not 9 months, but 3 cycles. So those are the big management level things, not necessarily things changed in code. So let's get into the things changed in code that are changing. First, there is a new warning mechanism for the API server to warn you about deprecated APIs. I was really excited about this. I got into it with a colleague of mine, and we found out that unfortunately, it's not yet extensible. So like if you have an operator that has a deprecated API, it's not quite yet extensible so that we could show that our operator's API has been deprecated. It's only for the API server at this point, but it looks like there's plans to extend it in the future. So be looking for that, especially if you support an operator or whatnot. You'll be able to throw a warning header in the API server to let people know that the API they're using has been deprecated. All right, so this doesn't really affect me because I'm mostly all Linux, but the containerd CRI support now is supported on Windows. So if you do use Windows, that's supported there. The certificate signing request API graduates to stable. Now, again, it graduates to stable. That's not a big thing, but I don't know that a lot of people know about this. Your Kubernetes cluster has a root CA itself that it uses to sign stuff. And with the certificate signing request, you can actually use this root CA to sign stuff for you. So you can make a signing request to it and get certificates signed that way for inside your cluster. So you can actually use that to your advantage. And so I thought it was worth mentioning. All right, so there are more structured logs for the Kubernetes control plane. So it's kind of been a free-for-all. Partially, I blame klog, the library they use for logging. And klog is actually getting updated to have better logging functions. They could have used something like Logris, or there's some other options that are real logging libraries. Klog is very, very simple as far as logging, and they're starting to expand that and make a structured logging for that. So that's really good to see because the Kubernetes control plane logs have been kind of a small dumpster fire. Something I'm really excited about, I think this is probably the biggest thing in here, is the endpoint slices API. So basically, effectively, you won't see a difference and you shouldn't probably even care at this point. But it enables a lot of really cool things in the future, as well as making large clusters much more efficient. So how it has been doing it has just been endpoints, and all your pods had to have all the endpoints. And this actually could be terabytes of data to do a rolling update through a cluster. And so that's not real great. And so basically what they did was take the endpoints and put them into slices. And what really gets cool about this is not only now is this more scalable and less work when you do like a rolling update or whatnot, but you can do topology routing and rollouts and things like this based off of topology. And it's going to bring things like multiple IP addresses per pod. So those aren't things in it yet, but this feature is what enables those features in the future. So be keeping your eye on this, and you should at this point just see a huge performance increase in large clusters. Now, if you have a small cluster with a few number of pods, not only will you not notice anything, but it won't actually help you at all either. But it is really cool, and you should keep your eye on it. For all of you who use sctp, it is now supported as an additional protocol along TCP and UDP in pod, service, endpoint, network policy, and is now in beta, which again, now moving to beta means that it's now enabled by default. So by default, you have sctp support. If you don't know what sctp is, it is the Stream Control Transmission Protocol. And all that really is a protocol that's geared towards streaming something to multiple endpoints at the same time. I assume that if this is interesting to you, you would know what it is. So we'll move on. And if you'd like a video on what sctp is, let me know and we can do a video on it. All right, the cubelet disabled accelerator usage metrics. This is really only cool because this one's on here, honestly, because I reviewed the pull request that got accepted in there. That's the most reason. But it's actually cool because the reason it got removed from the kubelet is because it's not needed anymore. And this was abstracted out so that the things could report their metrics themselves and export their metrics. So it wasn't needed for the kubelet to be exporting these metrics anymore. And so that's why it's cool. Yeah. All right. Seccomp reaches stable. Again, this is one of those that reach stable, but I think you should know about Seccomp. Okay, so Seccomp is the secure computing mode, and it's part of the Linux kernel. And it has now graduated to stable in Kubernetes, where you can actually apply Seccomp profiles to your Kubernetes cluster. And this allows you to have another layer of security for the things that are running in your Kubernetes cluster. Not only this, but there's actually a new Seccomp operator that's being created that is really cool and will help you deploy and manage your Seccomp profiles. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you really like your Kubernetes clusters to be secure, check out the links below to both of those projects. And if you're interested, jump on board and help out. All right, so component config work. If you're unfamiliar with component config is basically, if you're unfamiliar with component config is pretty much I'm going to say universal configuration of Kubernetes. It's kind of it used to be in Kubernetes before component config that everything kind of had its own way to parse and read JSON and make sure that the component had its correct defaults. And component config is the standardization of that. And it's moving forward in the kube scheduler and has moved into beta from alpha. So that's really awesome. All right, so let's move on to kubeadm. This is still in tree. So kubeadm was going to try to move out of tree and they decided not to. So it's still an in tree project. There's a lot of difficulties moving something that relies and is tightly coupled to Kubernetes out of the Kubernetes tree. They also are looking to deprecate kustomize and in its place introduced a simpler patches framework for customization of your deployment. So what it turned out to be is that kustomize was this really big, really complicated tool that really did more than they needed. It was way too much, and it was too much, and it is too much to maintain. And so they introduced a easier patches, link below for that if you're wanting to. So just an easier way to customize your deployment of kubeadm using patches. Another thing that has been added to the Kubernetes CLI or the kubectl is better support for debugging Kubernetes pods. So one of the things that they're really working on is this ability to attach a container or add a container to an already running pod, which is really awesome because you'll run into these times where there is a misbehaving pod and maybe it's hard to reproduce. You could deploy a new pod with debugging tools installed in it, but not be able to reproduce it because maybe it only happens every once in a while. And you don't really want to run these pods with debugging tools in them because you're expanding your security footprint, as well as just memory and resource consumption, especially if it's a large cluster. So what these tools allow you to do is attach a new container and insert it into a running pod. It's pretty cool. It's an alpha feature. You'll have to enable the alpha feature to play around and test it out, but it's worth a look. Moving on to storage, there's two new features in alpha, which is generic ephemeral inline volumes. I haven't gotten a chance to play around with those, but they look really awesome, and I'm excited to see where they go. And then the other one is storage capacity tracking, which pretty much is what it sounds like, storage capacity tracking, which is also pretty cool because it allows some more efficiencies. All right, my favorite in the storage one, because not only is it a performance boost, not only is it a security boost, it is also a stability boost. So it's like three of my favorite things all compiled into one, and it's immutable secrets and config maps. Now, you can mount secrets and config maps into pods, and you can mount them as read-only into pods. And that's cool because then the pod can't change the secret or config map, and that's nice. And that means your pod can't accidentally change. A lot of times people will use config maps to configure stuff. And that means that one pod can't misbehave and change that configuration. But you could use kubectl to change that configuration. And that could cause some problems, or you could accidentally change it, to be the larger concern. What immutable secrets and configs do is it actually makes the secret or config immutable. You can't do a kubectl apply on it. You'll get an error message from the server because it's literally immutable. And this not only saves you from accidents, from user error, the other thing is the cubelet doesn't have to go back and check periodically to see if the data has changed because it's immutable. So it actually increases performance in large clusters. And then security, those things stay immutable. And we've talked about security is the ability for you to reach your data. And if it gets if you misconfigure your application, there's bound to be downtime. And if there's downtime, that affects your security rating because now the data isn't available. So I really like this feature, and I can give a demo on it if you guys would like. It's really simple and easy to use. And yeah, so that's it. This is my list of my favorite things that I saw in 1.19. Next time for 1.20, I'm going to try to release this video before it's released. Another thing is Sysdig released a really awesome blog post on this subject. And so I've linked that below as well, which they brought out some highlights, some things that they really liked. Their list is a little bit different than mine, but not very much. And they actually have a lot more in their blog post. I tried to keep this video to a sane length. All right. I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that you found this informative and you learned something from it. I look forward to making a video for you next time. If you did not like this video, I'm going to need you to go ahead and subscribe, stick around, and see if these videos get any better for science.